The president took to the podium this weekend to brag about the economic achievements of his administration, talking about everything from low unemployment, wages, and trade deficits. Let's take a closer look at some of his claims.
Okay.
Because, Ali, the president is fantastic at selling the economy.
Yeah.
He's great at it. And businesses, large and small, feel good about his pro-business policies.
But apparently on Friday, he wasn't good at selling. He was good at lying about this. Things are good economically speaking, but it seems like the president still can't help himself when it comes to some lying. Let's listen.
We've accomplished an economic turnaround of historic proportions.
All right. Not sure what turnaround he's referring to. The president inherited an already booming economy. The U.S. economy is now in its 10th year of growth. 10th year of growth marked by falling unemployment and gains in home values. These are trends. You can look up charts. It's not a turnaround. This is a period of recovery that began under President Obama in the wake of a major recession. You can date it back to March 9th of 2009.
I am thrilled to announce that in the second quarter of this year, the United States economy grew at the amazing rate of 4.1%.
Well, he's correct. It was 4.1% for the second quarter, but that's actually not unheard of. Take a look at this, okay? This line here is 4%. He popped above 4.1% in this quarter, but the United States actually saw stronger quarterly increases 4 times during President Obama's term.
And with the help of Republicans in Congress, we passed, without one Democrat vote, the biggest tax cuts and reform in our history.
We've talked about this one before, Mr. President. President Trump's tax cut is actually the 4th biggest as a percentage of GDP, because that's actually how you have to measure them. It's the 4th biggest in history. The latest round of tax cuts was smaller than Obama's 2010 tax cuts as a proportion of GDP, the 2013 tax cuts, and doesn't hold a candle to Reagan's Economic Tax Recovery Act of 1981, which was the largest tax bill in the last 100 years.
We have added 3.7 million new jobs since the election, a number that is unthinkable if you go back to the campaign.
Okay, the president's claim that 3.7 million jobs is unthinkable, except that the figure's actually on pace with the last few years of the Obama administration. This is the average for the Trump administration. Ooh, look at that. That's the average of the last few years of the Obama administration. President Obama actually created more jobs in the last 18 months of his administration than President Trump created in the first 18 months of his administration. By the way, then the president moved on to wages.
Manufacturing wages are expected to rise at the fastest rate in over 17 years.
Now, this one had me scratching my head because we couldn't figure out the source for this, but we finally did. It sounds great. It's actually based on a survey of manufacturers, not any economic data. It's hard to believe, considering that wage growth has actually slowed. This is wage growth in the Trump administration. This is wage growth in the Obama administration. It has slowed significantly under President Trump's administration. So the whole thing is a little bit of a puzzlement.
And when people talk about wages, in some instances being higher, those are for higher learning jobs. Those are for high-skill jobs. Those low-wage jobs, which, remember, that's where the problem is. That's where the problem is. It's where it was during the Obama administration. It's where it remains. Joining us now, Stan Collender. He is the founder of The Budget Guy and adjunct professor at Georgetown University.
He actually is the budget guy.
He is the budget guy. Okie doke, Stan. The current strength of our economy, is that a sign that President Trump's policies are working? Because when he says it's a turnaround, we just made it clear there was absolutely no turnaround. It's true.
It's nice that he hasn't messed it up.
Hold on. His pro-business policies, his plans to deregulate is a positive if you talk to small and large business people. But if you're talking to the American worker, they don't seem to be saying that.
No, and in fact, you see GOP candidates around the country are not talking about the economy, not just not talking about the tax bill, but not talking about the economy because, as you just suggested, the benefits of the Trump plans are not reaching the average wage worker. They're not reaching the middle class. It's why that Democratic wave seems to be getting bigger, not smaller.
Stan, 4.1% quarterly economic growth. It's quarterly growth, spread out over the year. It's good. It's not as amazing as the president claimed. Why is it that economists, when talking about the economy, don't generally use the quarterly number to measure GDP growth?
Well, it's like looking at a batter who went 4 for 4 last night and deciding that he's going to have this phenomenal year. It's only one game. This is only one quarter. And besides, if you look at Goldman Sachs and a variety of other projections, the Congressional Budget Office and others, they're not saying that this is sustainable. In spite of the president said we're going to do better than this, all the forecasts by reputable economists are showing that it's going to get worse, not better, and that this 4.1% is the result of one-time sugar-coated kind of medicine as opposed to something that's going to be sustainable and continue over a period of time.
In large part caused by that surge in soybean exports, because we knew
the world wants more soybeans?
We knew the tariffs were coming, Mr. Sassy. Let's talk about the raises, though, because the president takes every opportunity, and he should, to talk about low unemployment. But normally, low unemployment is coupled with better wages. And there was this idea that tax cuts would lead to better wages. Where are they?
They're nowhere, actually. In fact, you just showed a variety of charts that would indicate that the average worker is not doing any better, that wage growth is not as high as it should be or it would be expected at this particular moment. More importantly, there's no expectation that it's going to get better. That wages are not going to be rising, that corporations don't seem to want to pay what it takes to get additional workers. Part of this has to do with technology. Part of this has to do with just greed on the part of the corporations. Yeah. So we're actually no place. And for the average worker, it's not just wages. It's that interest rates are rising.
Inflation.
It's inflation. You've got a variety of things that are actually making it more difficult to live day to day than it is to make it easier.
Stan, we got 30 seconds, but the president tweeted about a shutdown again this weekend. I think a lot of people sort of ignore it when he tweets about it, but talk to me about what the likelihood of a shutdown actually is, because we've heard it talked about in the last 24 hours.
Well, thank you for asking. I've been telling my readers for several weeks that I think the chances of a shutdown are 60%. Nothing that's happened over the last week, including the president's meeting with Paul Ryan and Mitch McConnell, and then this tweet have changed that. The president's going to look at this as maybe his last-ditch effort to get money for his wall, especially if he sees a Democratic wave coming. So it's at least 60% at this point.
Wow. Hey, MSNBC fans, thanks for checking out our YouTube channel. Subscribe by clicking on that button down there and click on any of the videos here to watch the latest interviews and highlights. You can get more MSNBC for free every day with our newsletters. Just visit msnbc.com/newsletters to sign up now.